36. We welcome the Taoiseach and call Deputy Pearse Doherty, please.
And it's with great sadness, that I learned of the death of Shane MacGowan, a musical icon. I think we can all agree, and Shane will be remembered as one of the greatest songwriters of his generation, greatly inspired by his Irish roots, Irish history and family. Shane brought his unique style to all corners of the world, and his music will continue to be enjoyed for generations to come. And Cancórla, on behalf of Sinn Féin, I want to extend my deepest condolences to his wife Victoria, his extended family, his wide circle of friends, and all who loved him and who loved his music. Yesje Goro Anam Yilish. Hanishe Yerin and Twiriscal on board Tihiakte Konie in you. And erdu ufasa keisner for den stage. Ta medu da doyeg fin gate taka keisna nua. Agus da keisna ta on in shin la tommel tishet sues nismo na quick fin gate. Lishin realty shot and gear him tihiak de dolanalkish. Agus kahi much kaska har erdihe keisne. Agus kahi fast de takiar to hort da keisari tri keis misa a horrorashner palki. Taoiseach, today your government broke a new record. Today's report from the Residential Tenancy Board reveals rent increases that are nothing short of shocking. Families, workers and young people deserve better. They need affordable housing and affordable rents. But this government doesn't care about renters, and that is very clear to see. In the past years, new rents have increased by almost 12% across the state. This is the highest annual increase ever since these increases have been recorded more than 15 years ago. Average new rents now across the state are almost €1,600 a month. And do you know what this means, Taoiseach, for an average renter? It means that they're going to have to find an extra €2,000 more on top of the existing rent to meet the new rents that are being charged now compared to this time last year. These are punishing rent hikes. In Dublin, new rents are now €2,105 a month. Taoiseach, it is not just new tenants that are suffering. Existing tenants are also being fleeced, with existing rents rising by 5% across the state. In my own county of Donegal, existing rents have spiked by 10% in the last year. And this is unsustainable for renters, for families and for communities. And it is clear that there are issues with landlords' compliance in relation to government's rent pressure caps, with existing rents now in Dublin over 5%. Renters cannot keep taking these kinds of rent hikes, Taoiseach. You tell us that you're making an impact on housing, but it's simply not true. Let's look at the facts. House prices are up, home ownership is down, rents are out of control, as we see, and homelessness is at record levels. Your plan is failing. The longer that you and your party are in office, the worse things get. And this report needs to be a wake-up call for all of you in the government benches. In March, Taoiseach, you told us that we've turned a corner on housing. Well, if that's true, what's clear from today's report, it was a bad turn for renters because the housing crisis is deepening for them. So Sinn Féin's proposal to ban rent increases would have prevented what we're seeing in this report today. And government must urgently now introduce a ban on rent increases for existing and new tenancies. You must also put a full month's rent back into renters' pockets. So, Taoiseach, what is your response to the shocking revelations on the harsh realities that are facing renters? That under your watch, in the last 12 months, that rents have increased across the state by 12%. Do you accept that under your housing plan, the condition for renters is getting worse, not better? And will you commit to banning rent increases together with a relief of putting 1 month's rent back into renters' pockets?
Well, first of all, Bála Dúspára Cobrona Yenev le Clown Shane MacGowan Van Victoria sucht Vosis Níl an Orasach Kjoltordan Sco via Oxatá. I want to express my deepest sympathies to the wife and family of the late Shane MacGowan, an iconic musician who I think blended many different musical disciplines and genres, but particularly influenced by his time in Tipperary and being raised in Tipperary and very conscious of the traditional musical sort of heritage, and interwove that with many others. And I think at this time of the year, particularly poignant in the context of Fairy Tale of New York, with Christy McCall, I think, written on a bet that he couldn't write a Christmas song, which he did, and it is one of the most enduring and resonates with all of us, and continues to do so. So Ayeshte Gorev Anan Delish. I've been very clear and consistent from the moment we began negotiations on the programme for government that helping people to afford to buy or to rent a home is a defining challenge of our time. And I have consistently described it as the most important social issue we face as a country. Access to a safe and comfortable home is the bedrock of social stability and progress in our country. And I've been equally consistent in saying there's only one sustainable solution: build more houses to own and to rent. Supply is the key. And we need action on every front. And action is underway on all fronts and is making a difference. And Housing for All remains the most comprehensive and detailed plan in respect of housing yet published. Nobody else, no other political party, has published anything approximating the detail and comprehensive nature of Housing for All. And by any measure, or by every measure of home permissions, completions, home purchases, first-time buyers, mortgage drawdowns, we are seeing positive momentum and movement, and things are changing for the better. By the end of this year, 100,000 homes will have been built since this government came into office. And we have started a new era of providing social houses in all parts of the country, with up to 30,000 delivered to date. And there's, in addition, 22,000 social homes either on-site or at design and tender stage. The Land Development Agency is having impact, with thousands of new affordable and social homes being developed on state-owned and private land. And we are supporting people in the private rental sector who are particularly squeezed because of lack of available rents and rising rents. We've introduced a new special tax credit for every renter, and a series of measures to try and maintain and increase the number of homes available for rent. The problems of derelict and vacant buildings has been targeted with very generous grant schemes and dedicated funding in every corner of the country. The Deputy must know now that the facts show that every week 500 first-time buyers are buying a new home. And I do believe home ownership should be supported. And that's why this government has expanded and created the Help to Buy and the First Home schemes, which are helping thousands through dedicated schemes for affordable homes. Now, Deputy, you oppose all of those. You oppose those schemes to help people get off the rent market and get into affordable homes. And we believe home ownership matters, and we want to increase home ownership as well as providing social housing. In respect of the RTB rent index and its main findings, first of all, in terms of the existing tenancy stats, the standardised average rent for existing tenancies is about 1,332. And this is the first time really where we have significant data on existing tenancies as opposed to new tenancies. Up, please. Apologies. I'll come back to it.
Deputy Doherty.
Minister, under your watch, not only are rents skyrocketing, the RTB are telling us in their report that never have they seen these increases ever before, and they've been recording this for 15 years. Rents under your watch in the last year have gone up 12%. And at the same time, home ownership is falling. You know what the average age now is before you can actually get the first-time buyers are? It's 35 years. Why? Because your policies are failing them over and over again. And I make the point, how bad does it have to get before you recognise that you need the type of intervention that Sinn Féin has been saying for years now? We need to ban rent increases. It's as simple as that. Or are you satisfied that areas like my county and your county and other counties are seeing double-digit rent increases year on year? That things are getting worse under Fianna Fáil, and we will be, if you're still in government this time next year, we'll be standing here and saying how worse it's getting again. And you keep telling us we've turned a corner. Well, see, for those renters, the corner they turned just got worse. Because if you're a new renter in Dublin, you're forking out €2,300 more than you were this time last year. That's That's the consequences of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in government. So I put it to you again. Will you ban rent increases to make sure that what we're seeing does not continue in the time ahead?
Thank you, Deputy.
Very clear that the situation would get far worse if Sinn Féin was in charge of housing, because banning rent increases won't produce one additional house. In fact, it will reduce the number of houses available for rent in the market. That would be the impact of your decision and your entire approach to the matter. We do need to support renters in terms of alleviation, in terms of the tax rental credit, which we have done. But your proposal would reduce the availability of housing. And if you reduce supply, the rents will go up even further. Supply is the key to this. Now, you talk about affordability. You opposed the Help to Buy scheme. You would abolish it. You opposed the First Home scheme. You opposed the grants for dereliction and vacant schemes. You've opposed a hell of a lot. You've opposed new housing schemes across Dublin on state land because it didn't contain all social housing. You didn't want affordable housing on certain sites in Dublin, and you opposed it. You've opposed a lot of things, Deputy, which brings me to the conclusion that your policies would make this situation far worse. Disincentivise house building, far worse they would get. And your policies are overly negative in respect of the housing issue.
Could we please stop? Deputy, could we please stop shouting? I'd like members to join with me before I go to Deputy Holly Kearns in extending a warm Kate Míle Fáilte to our colleagues from the National Assembly of Vietnam who have joined us in the Distinguished Visitors Gallery. The delegation is led by Mrs. Pham Tin Chinh, Vice Chairperson of the Committee of Financial and Budgetary Affairs. You're most welcome. I assume your Parliament... I assume your Parliament is more sedate than ours has managed to be today. Deputy Holly Kearns, please.
I want to start by acknowledging the sad death of Shane MacGowan. His legacy of iconic music is a testament to his genius, and on behalf of the Social Democrats I want to offer my condolences to his family, his friends and all who loved him. Taoiseach, I'm wondering, how high is too high? How high will rents have to go before your government says enough and actually does something about them? We have another report out today detailing sky-high rents. This time it's from the RTB. Rents for new tenancies are up an enormous 11.6%. Across the country, that means an average rent of €1,574 per month. Just 3 years ago, when you entered government, average rents were €1,226. Taoiseach, that's an increase of nearly €350 per month since you took office. This is the price of a Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Green Party government to renters out there. An extra €4,200 per year going to their landlords since you took office. Taoiseach, do you know how difficult it is for students, workers and families to scrape together an extra €4,200 per year? Do you know that families go without proper meals, without heating, without warm coats in the winter, just to pay their rent? Do you know how hopeless and trapped people feel because they can't afford to move out of their childhood bedroom? Do you know how difficult it is to save for a house when almost all of your income is going towards your soaring rent? If you know all of this, then why won't you do anything about it? Why do you continue to gaslight the nation and come in here and tell us that this failure is somehow a success? I can guess one of the things you might say, Taoiseach. You'll say rent increases for existing tenants are lower, but their rents went up by 5.3% and average rents are €1,332. So what you should acknowledge is that those figures are just more evidence that the rental market is broken. The maximum rent increase in rent pressure zones is supposed to be 2%. Your minister brought that rule in. But clearly, landlords up and down the country are ignoring that upper threshold and charging whatever they like. And why wouldn't they? Your government has overseen tenancy laws that amount to zero rights for renters. For no reason at all, tenants can be evicted. Meanwhile, the regulator, the RTB, is not so much toothless as comatose. It either doesn't have the power, the resources, or the interest to pursue landlords who breach the regulations. Taoiseach, I've listened to members of your government make earnest promises on housing for years. You say it's your top priority, but every year the crisis gets worse. Rents become even more unaffordable. The prospect of owning a home gets more out of reach, and record number of people are homelessness. We're all tired of these broken promises. Taoiseach, it's time for action. Will you freeze rents for 3 years, introduce a ban on no-fault evictions, and introduce a rent register so there's some transparency around rents?
Taoiseach, please.
Again, Deputy, we all recognise, and I've said it already, that housing is the most significant social issue we face in this country. But I'm interested in coming up with solutions. I've heard very little, precious little from you, other than a good descriptive analysis of the current situation, but actually no solutions. And freezing rent is not a solution. It is not a solution because it would cause a further exodus from the rental market, which would reduce supply and would result in ever-increasing rental prices. And that is the reality. Supply has to be the solution here. And we have a range of schemes that we've developed to increase housing supply. And we've brought in the tax credit to help people to alleviate the pressures of increasing rents. And we have strengthened very significantly the powers of the RTB. It's not fair or accurate to say that nothing has been done in terms of regulation in respect of the rental situation. The RPZs themselves, you've mentioned the rent pressure zones. 75% are now covered by rent pressure zones. Now this RTB index does not capture compliance, and it's not as simple as you've articulated in terms of breaches of the 2% or not. But there are sanctions, and there are significant resources have been allocated to the RTB in respect of that issue. But an ESRI study of the RPZs with the Department of Housing have said that if it wasn't for the RPZs and the zoning, the inflation in house rent would be notably higher. So they are impactful, and they are, notwithstanding the very high levels of rent across the country, which is a function of supply. And we just, and in the last 3 years alone, since this government came in, about 100,000 new homes will be delivered. We had COVID-19, which did impact initially in the first year and a half of government in terms of house construction. But we have, and we've also brought in the tenant in situ scheme, with about 2,500 sales now being progressed on that scheme alone. We've brought in the cost rental, which is rents are 25% below the market level, and up to quite a substantial number of cost rental homes have been made available. That's a whole new form of tenure, and we're going to drive that on in the months to come. So there's been a very wide-ranging number of schemes to get housing supply up, and ultimately that is key. And I would argue, by the way, that over the last 3 years, a lot of the negativity around the rental market and proposals for freezing and so on like that has had a negative impact on supply. And that is an issue that we need to focus on. How do we get more houses into the market, into the rental market in particular, so that we can get supply down and get the rents, at least the rate of increase down, and develop schemes as we have in terms of social housing and in terms of the cost rental, that we can give options to people for much lower rents than currently is the case.
Deputy Kearns.
After listening to you, you'd swear that this is some kind of big conspiracy to make Fianna Fáil and the government look bad when they're doing everything that they can. But if it is, I'm afraid that the RTB, the RSI, and loads more are in it with me. You may not want to admit it, but the facts are the facts. And the facts are that rents in this country under your watch are a runaway train. And you keep coming in here and telling us that everything's under control. But every year it gets worse. The housing crisis has become a housing disaster. At what point will you actually just admit that your approach is not working? Because people out there can't afford any more of these mistakes. Since you came into office in 2020, you've cost renters an additional $4,200 a year. How much more will people have to pay for this failure and this denial? You say housing is the biggest social issue that we face. I agree with you. Why don't you act like it and do something about it. You're constantly asking for solutions. I know there are bigger solutions around supply. All of those things are absolutely necessary, and I'm not disregarding them, but given the consistent rising figures in homelessness, will you introduce a rent freeze, bring back the ban on no-fault evictions, and introduce a rent register so renters at least know if they're being ripped off?
First of all, Deputy, I think there's a huge dearth of proposals and solutions from you and your party in respect to housing. I don't see any detailed proposals over and above what's in housing for all the government's comprehensive housing plan in terms of increasing supply. You've made a passing reference in your question there to, yeah, you do accept that there's higher, bigger need for housing supply. Housing supply is the key. And I think some of the policies that you've put forward in terms of banning and freezing would actually reduce supply and would have a very negative impact on the rental market. And that would mean higher prices again. And I do have to challenge that simplistic notion that we can simply ban everything for 3 years and everything will be the same, or it'll get better. If you ban anything for 3 years, people get out of the market and do other things. We've seen that. And we've tried to clamp down on some of that in terms of Airbnb and so on like that, and provide for planning permissions so as to try and keep a higher number of houses in the rental market so that we can try and keep a downward pressure on prices. But the way I would respectfully suggest that you're directing policy or suggesting policy should go would actually reduce supply and increase prices even more.
Deputy Dennis Naughton, please.
Tánaiste, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, is a major health issue in Ireland, claiming the lives of 4 people daily. It is a lung condition affecting 1 in 13 adults, hindering the movement of air in and out of their lungs and making breathing difficult. Despite its manageability, only 20% of those with COPD are diagnosed, often too late, as diagnoses frequently occur during medical emergencies. This contributes to Ireland having the highest hospital admission rates for COPD in the developed world, with nearly 2 admissions every hour, double the OECD average. While this situation places a financial strain on our health service, costing approximately €120 million annually in hospital admissions, it also puts greater pressure on hospital beds during the winter when acute COPD-related illnesses are more frequent, as these patients tend to stay in hospital significantly longer than the average patient. Reducing hospital admissions for COPD would significantly ease overcrowding in our emergency departments this winter. It's frustrating that COPD management is feasible, yet healthcare delivery falls short. Under Sláinte Care, 24 integrated care consultants were promised to manage COPD care, but only 8 are in place. General practitioners have primary responsibility for COPD care, and they were promised to be supported by 30 specialist ambulatory hubs. However, only a fraction of these hubs and the planned clinical nurse specialists in pulmonary rehabilitation are operational. Tánaiste, I must reiterate that the lack of support services leads to overwhelming pressures on our emergency departments, especially during the winter, with COPD patients occupying beds that could be avoided with better community health care. Moreover, the socioeconomic status significantly contributes to COPD outcomes in Ireland. The risk of dying from COPD is as high due to poverty as it is to smoking-related causes. Furthermore, there's a staggering 366% disparity in COPD mortality rates between that of a barrister and that of a bricklayer. Factors such as poor housing, low income, limited access to healthcare, types of employment and environmental conditions disproportionately affect those with COPD from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Tánaiste, we must prioritise community-based COPD care within our health service in the interests of all our patients.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
First of all, I'm going to thank the Deputy for raising this very important issue. And historically, Ireland has had very high prevalence of COPD. And there can be different factors, even climate. And that's one factor. I think you've outlined it towards the end of your contribution, the public health framework that governs much of this, and smoking was a big factor, but smoking tended to be socioeconomic as well in terms of prevalence and scale. And so various measures we have taken as a country on smoking has helped, but there are issues around work safety in terms of dust and inhalation, and I think we have improved a lot of that compared to where we were 10 or 20 years ago. So that prevention piece is extremely important. You're correct on housing as well, and the quality of housing. So those are all areas that will help to prevent. Now, in addition to that, then you need a proper community-based model of care, and then you need an acute system of care. Now, in 2019, the HSE developed a COPD model of care, and that redefined the way health services are to be provided to people with the disease. And in November of 2021, the first national clinical guideline for the management of COPD was launched, and that's idea being the right care delivered to people with COPD at the right time and in the right place. And then the chronic disease management programme commenced in 2020 and has been rolled out to all adult GMS patients over a 4-year period. That chronic disease management programme, that's an entirely new healthcare service in Ireland, has brought the care for chronic disease further into the community. Its aim is to reduce hospital attendance by patients with one or more of these specified conditions. The COPD is a specified chronic disease that falls to be managed under that particular programme. And through the chronic disease, as you've said, management contract, GPs are funded to provide structured reviews and interventions in time with the model of care. Each patient receives 2 scheduled reviews with the GP in a 12-month period, each preceded by a practice nurse visit. And those reviews are to include patient education, preventative care, medication review, physical examinations, individual care planning, and scheduled investigations. And then in addition to that, to the GP chronic disease management programme, the enhanced community care programme, as you know, is a suite of strategic reform initiatives. Under that programme, about 3,500 people are being recruited, with 2,800 already recruited. 96 community healthcare networks are now operational under the enhanced community care. 24 of the 30 community specialist teams for older persons are operational, and 24 of the 30 CSTs for chronic disease management are operational. So progress has been made, Deputy. I don't doubt that more needs to happen because it's a particularly nasty disease that can significantly hamper a person's quality of life. Thank you. We will continue to work on it.
Deputy
Taoiseach, I want to focus on one contributory factor to COPD, and that's poor housing. Now, research commissioned by the Department of Climate Action and produced by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine has shown that retrofitting of homes of those with COPD or asthma reduces their use of GP, emergency department and hospital services. A win for our climate and a win for our health services. Yet if someone in receipt of the fuel allowance applies for the home energy retrofit under the Warmer Homes Scheme today, they won't see the benefits of that until the winter of 2026-2027, 2 winters away. What is even more concerning is that those living in some of our coldest homes, the ones that are built of stone, are completely excluded from the scheme and receive no support whatsoever. Taoiseach, this is just not good enough and needs to be urgently reviewed.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
I admired the Deputy's ingenuity and creativity from turning chronic disease management programme into a very specific grant-based, or the deficiencies of the grant-based system for retrofitting, and that's to be applauded. But I acknowledge what you're saying, and I think you're alluding to the fact that there's so many applications, and it's the capacity of the scheme to get responses more quickly. But there is no doubt, though, if you look at it compared to before this government came into power, like the contrast in the volume of retrofitting that's now going on. There's an entire new industry being created as a result of guaranteed funding over the next decade through National Development Plan that gives the industry confidence in the retrofitting area. And we do want, in particular, those in the more disadvantaged income groups to get the benefits of retrofitting as quickly as possible. And I think you've identified a very key point, which many people who are denying climate change and so on, or who are less than enthusiastic about it. There's an inextricable link between climate change and public health. So if you take fossil fuels out of cars and buses, you have a much healthier atmosphere in cities and towns that people breathe in the air. And likewise, if you do retrofitting, there are huge public health benefits for people.
Deputy Carol Nolan now on behalf of the Rural Independent Group.
In June of this year, a scoping report on the sexual exploitation of children in state care by UCD academics Dr. Mary Canning, Dr. Marie Keenan and Miss Ruth Breslin was published. The report outlined in horrifying detail the predatory behaviour that these young people, mainly young girls, are being subjected to. We were told they are being manipulated, coerced or deceived into sexual activity in return for something they want or need, to the advantage, of course, of the perpetrator. We read how some of the most vulnerable children in this state, in state care, are going missing or running away from home or a care placement, despite the fact that some have an intellectual disability, suffered prior sexual abuse or neglect, alcohol or drug misuse. Unfortunately, this frankly terrifying and explosive report was lost in the media noise generated by the RTE payments controversy. It has received nothing like the kind of media and political attention that it deserves, because it is very concerning. I have placed a number of parliamentary questions on this matter. The most recent reply left me almost speechless. I have been informed that almost 5 months on from the publication of this explosive report, the Department of Children has made absolutely no contact with the Department of Justice to discuss these matters, nor has anyone from the Department of Justice reached out to the Department of Children. How can this be, Taoiseach? We know that the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 2017 clearly states that a child below the age of sexual consent, 17, cannot consent to sexual activity. This clearly demonstrates that there is a legal and justice-related dimension to this issue. Yet, in 5 months, there has been no engagement with or from the Department of Justice on the scoping report and on its recommendations. I and my staff have met with Dr. Canning and Ms. Breslin, and we had a very informative, fruitful and constructive discussion. They acknowledge that the Minister O'Gorman, took the issue seriously, but clearly there is a desperate and almost unforgivable lack of urgency, which concerns many of us greatly. Urgency must be applied to this issue at the interdepartmental level. I'm asking you today, Taoiseach, to ensure that attention is refocused on this highly significant report and that it becomes a priority of government, and in particular Department of Children and Department of Justice, to progress the recommendations made within it. Will you commit to doing that here today, Taoiseach?
Thank you, Deputy Nolan. Taoiseach.
First of all, I thank the Deputy for raising this very important issue, and the UCD Sexual Exploitation Research Programme report raises matters of the most profound concern. The Department of Children, Equality, Disability and Integration and TUSLA are aware of risks to children in care, and TUSLA is continually working to address these complex and concerning issues, including working with An Garda Síochána as required. There's no doubt that children in the care of the state are the most vulnerable individuals in our society. TUSLA and the Department are committed to promoting safe and high quality practice in all areas of alternative care. Now, this report raises concerning issues, as you've said, in relation to the potential exploitation of children, including those in the care of the state. that some of the contributors to the research reportedly felt that young girls in residential care were being targeted by predatory and organised groups. That is particularly concerning. The report does not purport to be representative of the experience, of course, of all children or professionals working with children. Nonetheless, it sheds very important light on these very important matters. Now, Minister O'Gorman, again, as you've fairly said, he has engaged and met with the authors of the report. His officials have engaged with TUSLA to ensure that any child protection concerns outlined in the report have been actively followed up, including in respect of any necessary reports to An Garda Síochána. And prior to the publication of the UCD report, the Department of Children and TUSLA had established a working group looking at institutional and organisational abuse. The Department has since requested that this group examine the report, provide a response and make recommendations as required. I've been informed that once this working group provides a response to the SERP report, it is the intention of the Minister to then pursue what further steps may be deemed necessary. On the 27th of July, the Minister met with a delegation from the UCD SERP, including one of the authors of the report, in order to discuss the research in more detail. He outlined to them the next steps he's taking, and the authors of the report were urged to report to TUSLA any child protection issues that were mentioned in the report and where a child may be at risk. On the 31st of July, the Minister wrote to the Joint Committee on Children in order to provide his observations on the report and outline a number of significant initiatives that TUSLA and the Department of Children have undertaken in recent years to mitigate the risks to children of sexual exploitation while they are in the care of the state. And on Wednesday, the 20th of September, the Minister engaged directly with the Joint Oireachtas Children's Committee on wide-ranging matters relating to TUSLA's provision of alternative care services. And there's a range of key actions that have been undertaken by the Department in respect of child sexual exploitation. On the 10th of July, the Department wrote to TUSLA, requested from the agency a response to the UCD report to outline the extent to which the issues raised are being addressed and identify any gaps relating to child sexual exploitation. The Department again requested that the Institutional Abuse Group consider the report, provide a response and make recommendations. The Department also requested TUSLA to liaise with An Garda Síochána regarding the issues raised in the findings of the report, and the Department is leading an interdepartmental group on the national implementation of Barnahus, which is a multi-agency approach to the provision of forensic medical intervention and therapeutic services to children subject to child sexual abuse.
Deputy Noel.
Garma, good Taoiseach, thank you for your response. But I do regard this situation, as many others do, as an absolute emergency. It's absolutely shocking, and it needs more urgency and more actions, and at speed. I do believe that the actions need to be sped up significantly. I know that one immediate action that could be taken here today and committed to is to deal with how these issues are classified by the Department of Justice. I know in my discussions with Dr. Canning and Miss Ruth Breslin that was emphasised. The scoping report clearly shows that the reclassification of data by the Department of Justice in 2017 has led to a significant reduction in offences recognised as trafficking of children for sexual exploitation. And although the reasons offered for the reclassification were deemed vague and difficult to substantiate in a meaningful way by the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, so I think that needs to be looked at, the whole area of reclassification. And I want to end by saying that it would be to our eternal shame if we were to allow this scoping report and its findings once more to recede into the media and political shadows. The voices of these children who desperately need our help urgently, need to be heard above the noise. They are screaming for our help, and we must not turn a deaf ear towards them. We must act. Thank you.
Again, I thank the Deputy for raising the issue. I think you've performed a good, if you don't mind me saying so, public service in having the issue brought to the floor of this House during leaders' questions. It gives the issue the attention and profile that it, without question, deserves and justifies. And again, TUSLA in 2021 have implemented its child exploitation procedure in partnership with An Garda Síochána. So there is a strong partnership between TUSLA and An Garda Síochána. A joint working protocol between TUSLA and An Garda Síochána forms a critical part of the response to child abuse, neglect and child sexual exploitation. A principal social worker from Tusla has been seconded to the Garda National Protective Service Bureau for a number of years, and Tusla has established an anti-trafficking working group in readiness for the Department of Justice's National Action Plan for Human Trafficking, which includes the area of child sexual exploitation. I will follow up with the Minister in respect of the issue of reclassification and the classification of these issues, and will revert back to the Deputy.
Thank you very much, Tánaiste. That concludes leaders' questions.